my talk. Here we go. He said he living life as a gringo, where you question where you fit in every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos, of course. And man, let me tell y'all real quick before I get into what we're talking about today's show. Last week kicked my ass. I feel like I've been saying that since we've started the show, but last week I got super sick for like all of the entire week, pretty much into the weekend, and I barely got through that Thursday trends to get it out. I was hurting. I'm proud of myself though. Like I pushed through. I got the essential stuff done and then rested as much as I possibly could. And then I think I was DJing on Saturday night. I think I sweated it all out and I felt amazing by Sunday. So much so that I pushed it a little bit and I went out on a Sunday night like a crazy person. And I'm still feeling it. I still regret it. I don't know if my voice is gone from going out over the weekend or because I'm still just getting over being sick. But you know what? We're going to push past it, guys. All right, we out here. New episode coming at you today, and an amazing one at that. I'm really excited about today's guest, Andrew Boryga. He's an incredible author, and he has a book coming out on March 12th called Victim, which you can pre-order right now. It'll get delivered to your house on March 12th. And man, first of all, I got sent this book, I think it was in January, so I got to take it with me when I went away to Puerto Rico and I was reading it, and it's a fiction book, which I'm normally not big on. I'm like obsessed, obviously, with like a lot of the more spiritual or business or self-helpy, whatever it is, type books. But I don't know. I found myself kind of falling back in love with fiction, which I was a big fan of, obviously, as a kid and like anybody else, I guess. And also being able to see like the messaging within the fictional story, you know. And I don't know, just a really dope book, and I don't want to give away too much. It's one of those books that really makes you kind of think as well and sort of challenges a lot of narratives. And even sort of like reading it, I was like, man, I'm not sure what to make of Andrew or where he stands, and we'll kind of get into that in the interview. But I love the idea that it challenged me to kind of think of things a little bit differently. And we'll dive into what I mean by that. I know I'm being very vague here, but it's especially important because there's a crazy stat. I'm going to pull it up later, but majority of books written throughout the last 50 years have not been written by persons of color, especially fiction books. It's incredibly hard to get a book deal, incredibly hard to find any sort of success and all these things. And I just love to see people winning, and I'm really excited about this book. It's an amazing story that really makes you think, and you know, it doesn't hurt that it's by a Puerto Rican author about a Puerto Rican main character. So you know, there's some favoritism happening there for my fellow Boricua, of course. But without further ado, let's just get into this conversation because it's super dope. No As A Gringo on today's show. I would lie to you and said that I didn't have a good topic, but the truth is, I am just bouncing back. I was hanging out for dear life with getting everything together, and it slipped my mind to post on social media. So I fucked up. I apologize. I need to do better. I will do better. But with that said, let's get into our interview with Andrew Boryga for our Mi Gente segment. Mi Gente. My guest today is a Bronx native who is an author and journalist. He has written for the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, and his debut novel, Victim, is available on March 12th. Pre-orders available now, though. My guy, Andrew Boryga, how you doing, bro?
I'm great, man. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very, very happy to be here.
Of course, brother. I mean, first and foremost, I got to address the elephant in the room. If I'm not mistaken, you're from the Bronx, but you got a damn Mets hat on. So what are we doing right now?
Yeah, man. I've gotten a lot of shit for. I can curse, right?
Oh yeah. Do your thing.
Okay, yeah. I got shit for that my whole childhood, so I just embrace it now. But yeah, I'm a Mets fan through and through, and
bro, that's a book in itself. Yeah, I was gonna say that's a book in itself. The struggle of being a Mets fan in the Bronx.
It is. Yeah, man. I mean, listen, I've been telling people, I'm like, yeah, I have book critics and stuff. They're gonna read my book and
Yeah.
criticize them. Like, you're not gonna tell me anything I haven't already heard in the
Yeah.
streets in the Bronx from Yankee fans.
That's so true, bro. I mean,
My
I want
skin
to.
is my skin is quite thick.
Yeah, I can imagine at this point, man. I listen, my heart on some real
Yeah,
shit. I am not a Mets fan whatsoever. I root against y'all all the time, but there are certain
yeah,
fan bases that I do actually have some real empathy for, and Mets fans are definitely towards the top of that list.
yeah. No, we're it's a tough people to be among.
Yeah, the struggle is real. But I wanna talk about like your journey in writing, but I really just want to dive into the book first and foremost, and then we'll kind of backtrack a little bit
Yeah, man.
because I really did enjoy it. I mean, subtle flex. I started it while I was in Puerto Rico, so it was super fitting to be like on the island and you sort of painting that picture of the main character as a kid on the island visiting his father. But I think
Yeah.
let's sort of just first and foremost, I guess, a quick synopsis, if you will. Anybody who hasn't sort of heard about Victim yet, what is kind of the elevator pitch you would give to somebody as a description to kind of set the tone for what we're talking about today?
Yeah, so Victim is follows a young writer named Javi who grew up in the Bronx. He's Puerto Rican, comes from a family of hustlers. His dad is a drug dealer who he sees gets killed quite young, but he has this kind of hustler mentality and spirit, and he sort of realizes upon making his journey to college that there's this trending clamoring for diverse voices and that he fits as one of those. And so he decides to basically give that clamoring like what it wants and sort of
Yeah.
like, pimps out his identity in a way because he sees it as a path to success and he sees it as basically his hustle. But it kind of comes back to bite him in the ass later on, and he has to really reckon with who he really is.
I see. I'm obsessed with this concept because I think it's so fucking relevant to the world that we live in, where there are so many people selling you on everything. There's literally selling you on living life every day, essentially, right? There's a course for this, there's a course for that. There are a lot of companies and people placating to pretend like they actually give a shit about marginalized groups of people. It's just an
Right.
interesting time to live in, and I think this book is sort of a commentary on that. But I guess my first question begins with, you talk about you have somebody who sort of pimps out his identity, to take your words, right, to really find success, career success in this world, right, and does it taking advantage of some of like the diversity practices that are happening, or that are sort of being pushed, to be emphasized in today's culture, today's world, be it colleges, be it the job place, and the placating that sort of happens. But then you also, what was fascinating to me is like this story of a pretender almost, but then you start the book with a quote from James Baldwin, which is somebody who is obviously very much a very real figure within the modern civil rights movement. So I just want to get in your headspace when you were sort of beginning to conceptualize this book. Like, what was sort of the message you were trying to get across through the story of Javi, and I guess, was it your commentary on the state of the world that we live in today?
Yeah, man. No, it's a great question, and I'm glad you enjoyed that quote because I mean I put that there purposely to
Sure.
to sort of I think a lot of a big goal of mine as a writer, I enjoy making people a little like uncomfortable and not necessarily know where I'm coming from, what's going on, because
Mm,
I love books like that. If I read a book and like especially fiction and it's like it reads more of like a diatribe where I know who's the good and who's bad,
hmm
it loses interest for me immediately. And so a big goal was just to like talk about this cultural moment we're in, but do so in a way that didn't feel heavy-handed, that had some humor, hopefully was entertaining, and also, makes you think about like who's really in the right, who's really in the wrong here,
mm.
what's really happening here. And my real goal is just to leave the audience, the reader, with those questions and to hopefully bring up some things that they can think about. But yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, I think I was a journalist and a writer coming up during the 2012 2013 up until like 2020 2021,
hmm
when I started really honing in on this book. And I saw this sort of happening. Like I saw all of a sudden like stories that I would pitch when I was like back in, 2009, 2010 that nobody wanted to touch that were in the Bronx.
Mm-hmm.
They were hot like in 2015, 2016, but it was like, but it was a certain type of story, and if you had that type of story, like, well, you're good to go. You know what I mean? Like they wanted you. But if it was a little too nuanced and not exactly that fit this box, then it was kind of, hey, what about this other one? And so I saw that happening over and over. And it's something that I was just like, it's there's this call for diversity and everything, and that's great. And I was like happy and excited about that. But then I started to think and realize, is it really like, did he really serious about it? Or are we just like a little, we're like a trending topic that you're kind of like hopping on right now. And and so I wanted to write about that. And it's turned out to be kind of prescient, because it's not something that I thought was going to necessarily bubble to the surface around the time the book was coming out. That's just like timing that just happened. But it's been interesting to see, these conversations happening out in the open a lot more now.
Yeah. And it's funny, man, kind of what you were talking about, sort of setting up the reader to not know what to expect almost, right? And for me, when I, before I actually kind of dove into the book and just reading like the synopsis that's available of it, I was a little bit torn, because I was like, man, is this somebody who is sort of critiquing this moment right now and critiquing all the good that's happening within it, right? Is this going to be like, when we talk, is it a hostile conversation? Is it against my own core things? But at the same time, to your point, it also sort of forces you to, I don't know, I mean, it forces you to also like reduce your ego, your identity a little bit, and also recognize sort of the bad that is also within the good, if you will, right? The other side of the coin, the overcorrections that tend to happen, even when our best intentions are good almost, right? And to me personally, not to put words in your mouth, but that sort of feels like that's sort of what the commentary is almost, in addition to what you said, where we question how genuine people are being or sincere they're being, be it those in power, paying for stories like this one to be able to be released, or those who are writing the stories. Essentially, I feel like that might kind of be more in line, or I'm curious if that is resonating with you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was thinking about all those things, and I'm happy to hear that's like that came up for you too, because that was the goal.
Yeah, and I think it's essential, right? Because even if you believe you're on the right side of history with a lot of these topics, there also is a problem where the sort of algorithmic society that we live in, culture that we live in, keeps feeding you things that just keep reinforcing your own opinions, right? Because at the end of the day, sort of what I've realized in like politics and things like that is neither side has gotten it right. Both have very sort of things that they have fucked up completely, right? And things that they are claiming to care about a certain people, but that, while on the other hand, their actions are showing that, they really don't give a shit about anybody else but themselves, essentially, right? And there's evidence of that on both sides. And I think a lot of what's happening in our current culture, the political discourse and things of that nature, is because we've all picked teams as if they're like a sports team, right? Like, you're going to ride or die for the Mets regardless, right? But like, our politics shouldn't be like that, because it doesn't yield the best results for all of us. You know what I mean? Like, there's like that, the sports teams and things like that, that's entertainment, right? That's something we look at, to kill time, whatever it is. But like, things that have an effect on our everyday lives, we're basically allowing ourselves to become puppets to those who have ill intentions, essentially, for their own personal gain, and they pretend to care by placating our own fears and the notion that we refuse to look at any other vantage point other than our own.
No, I think that's totally spot on. I think that I take digs at both sides in the book, and that's for good reason, because I think that while obviously one side like talks the talk much better, and perhaps walks the walk a little bit better as well. There's also this like commodification that goes on, and it's like, we speak for you, and we, or we will lift your voice, but as long as you're saying the right thing that we want you to be saying, or like this, you're even the words, marginalized, you're minority, you're like, it's all these like but you're lower, remember,
Right.
subtly, whereas like I live in Florida and it's like a different
Yeah.
different story out here, but
Sure.
it's kind of like more in your face, like where people stand. So it's like, what's right or wrong, I don't know, but there's issues on both sides, and I think it was a fine line to try to walk,
Mhm.
and it's something that I think maybe some people won't be into, or think might be put off by it, but it was a story and a commentary that I felt like needed to be put out there, particularly by someone who is a person of color who's maybe considered, marginalized by some, so like I thought from our perspective, we hadn't necessarily had that out there. It'd been a lot of other narratives where it's like they're always the right person,
Right.
fighting against the forces that are holding them down. And I was just
Yeah.
like, what if I just flip that and like, actually, this guy's in control. He's just
Yeah.
maybe not doing what you would hope, and maybe has some learning to do.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I'm curious for you in writing it. You had to know there's probably going to be some blowback from your own community, right? Where, it's the idea of like, even if what you're saying is true, it's like you're going to fuck it up for everybody by calling it out, right? Because then it's like, then you're going to give the other side, the racist white people, they're going to be able to point to that and be like, see, this is exactly what we're afraid of, and he gets it, right? So I'm curious if you've had some blowback, or even just while writing it, how you're pushing past maybe some of that initial fear of like, man, is this going to be something that impacts my community negatively, or is it going to just force us to keep digging deeper? I guess that's probably the
Yeah.
struggle you were going through while writing it, I'm assuming, and I'm curious also after, now that it's kind of out there for people to check out.
Yeah. It's something that I thought of a bit, and I think I, I think that if like the people who are closest to me in my community and that know me
Yeah.
know where I stand on these things and know where I come from and what like the life that I've actually lived, and and the things that I've kind of stood for and written about. You can go back and look at the kind of stories I used to write for these publications and sort of get a sense of where I come from. And so it was more of like I'm secure in me, and I know that what my intentions are. And so I understand people who just come across it might draw their own conclusions, and it's art,
Sure.
it's something that I can't really control at the end of the day. And so I think when I came to that conclusion and was just confident in that and comfortable in that, I was like, well, I'm gonna tell the story that I feel like I need to tell, and then just see where the cards lay, and
Yeah.
hopefully people understand it and get it. And for the most part, I gotta say, I mean, the book hasn't come out yet, it hasn't hit this wider readership yet, so we'll see what happens. But I haven't gotten huge, blowback or anything. I think some people have. I've gotten a couple reviews where they thought, it's maybe a shallow treatment, or they were maybe wanted me to hit certain things harder. But I think for the most part, people are getting it and appreciating it and seeing the value in it. So
Hmm.
I feel happy. I feel content with the responses gotten, particularly like from heroes of mine. Like
Hmm.
some of the authors who blurred the book are people who like I've looked up to forever. So I'm like the OGs give me
Yeah.
they're showing me love and respect, and they see what I'm doing, and I'm just like, all right, like whatever happens, and so be it.
Yeah, no, I love you calling it art, and art at its best is honest, right? And
Yeah,
regardless, because when you're creating, you never want to taint your unique voice with the sort of fear or messaging of other people. Your art is supposed to be you sort of honestly, from mind to canvas, essentially, whatever your canvas is. And I think that's a beautiful thing to be able to kind of stand on. And I think also, it's something I argue with my dad about, because he's like, I always say he's like the mayor of proud Puerto Ricans, right? Like, but like, when talking about what's going on over there, he always is like, well, corruption exists in the US, right? But so like he's always making excuses. And my argument is, you can't be too proud to call out the bullshit, or else nothing's ever going to change, right? Because that keeps us
right.
in the same cycle when we are sort of too scared to have the hard conversation because we're too proud of our culture, right? The only way that it grows is by calling out the things that no longer serve us and moving towards things that actually do, right? Having those sort of tough dialogue. So that's why I love conversations like this one, because it forces you to sort of think a little bit deeper, right? Which I think the world as a whole could probably use a bit more of, right? But I think also one thing that really stuck out to me, I kind of pulled a quote from it, from the book, and it was a conversation with the main character Javi, right? And he's being asked, "Are you serious about being a voice for this community, as you like to say you are, or basically, are you just about doing what's best for Javi?" Right?
Mm-hmm.
And this really stuck out to me, maybe my own personal journey in sort of trying to move past the ego, right? And trying to be really clear on staying intentional about helping people rather than doing what's best for Dramos the person, right? Rather than placating to what social media wants or whatever it is to get more views and more clicks, and walking that fine line of creating something that people are going to watch, but more so with the intention of it being something positive that gets viewed by as many people as humanly possible. And that's a fine line to walk, right?
Yeah.
And even as you're creating works like this one, when you have a deeper message, the accolades do feel good, like you said, when your hero authors tell you great book, great writing, and things like that, right? And it can pollute where you are and what your purpose is, and then like self-serving, right? And I just thought that was a really interesting dialogue to kind of be happening and so relevant. I'm curious how that maybe shows up in your own life, where you have to walk that line of, not getting caught up in the accolades or what's self-serving, but like remaining, true to the purpose at hand.
Yeah. No, it's a struggle, man. It's something that I think I struggled with a lot more before I wrote this book, or actually in the, so like the book is actually, it stems from 10 years worth of writing that just, it kept transforming, every few years. And this is the current iteration. And this is the one that was like, okay, this is it. I get it now. I was just learning who these people are. But I always had the same two characters, and it was like watching them grow basically. But there was a period in my life from, probably, I don't know, 2015 and 2017 and 2018, whatever, where I was like heavily invested in this like literary world, TM, like the Twitter games and like who's following who, how many followers I got, why don't I have the blue check? Like back when the blue check was just like, it was like God gives it to you. And
Sure.
like, why didn't I get the blue check yet?
For sure.
What am I doing wrong? And I cared about all that shit, and so I was super in it, but at the same time, my actual writing suffered so much because all I would think about was like, all these stupid metrics and things, and who has what agent, and why don't I have an agent, and why am I not publishing here, and blah blah blah. And so it totally muddled my actual work, and I didn't have fun at all. And honestly, a big shift of mine for me personally was having my children. I have two kids, and my son was born in 2020. And, right in the middle of the pandemic, the world's like going crazy. And I was just like, I have for so long, I thought of myself, I'm just a writer, and like my writing is everything to me. And now it's like, I have this child that I have to like sustain and take care of. And like, I love them so much. And like, like my priorities just shifted kind of a little, and I don't know what it was, but it was a subtle thing. And all of a sudden I was like, like if this book actually becomes something great, if it doesn't, whatever, like I'm going to try to have fun again. Like when I first started writing fiction in college, and I just discovered this world, and I was like, oh, this is fucking cool. And I could like write about my community and people I know and funny shit. And like, and I'm just going to go do that, And so it was this really profound, but like simple shift that happened as soon as my kid was born. And then, I have another daughter now. And so like, I feel just really grounded in who I am as like Andrew, and writing is obviously something I'm really proud of and it's important in my life, but it's like no longer my everything that I can feel like lose my way as much. I feel a little bit more firmly grounded. So that's been a huge help to me, honestly, man.
Yeah, I mean, and that's beautiful. And I think, I think we all struggle with it, in varying levels. I think obviously when you are doing things that are like public facing, where there's, people can check your stats and like the follower count, all that kind of, and that matters, right? Or what publication you got to write for, that matters, I think obviously it's a bit more, I don't know, the intoxication is a little bit easier to fall victim to, but I think I think you see it now with even social media for the everyday person, right? The everyday person treats their social media feed as if it's something they're getting paid to do, right? They are curating it as if they are an influencer who gets paid by brands to put out, this level of quality content, blah, 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 right? Rather than enjoying it for what it's supposed to sort of be. And And then I think, you know, even on the deeper level, kind of circling back to politics and things like that, it's easy to like have a bit of, I don't want to say empathy, but I can humanize a bit of some of these people, even who are starkly just have different, you know, opinions than I do about the world. I can imagine how intoxicating it is to get that powerful, right? To become that powerful, have all of these people backing you, and you sort of then that becomes your fucking identity. And then you're essentially, you've opened up Pandora's box because you've morally moved the goal line so many times that now you don't even know which way is up. And that's why they continue to play the game that way, right? And, you know, and I get it. I get it. I think that's like, there's a human existence and a need and a want for validation. And we're all just like starving in our own way to sort of find it, you know? And, you know, I think that your character Javi is like a perfect example of that, you know, of somebody starving to feel validated, to feel seen. And because they allow the moral goal line to be moved so many times, they just keep sort of justifying their actions almost, you know? And I'm curious kind of the inspiration for that character, that sort of character arc, that narrative, like where that came from, if that was pulling from your own struggles, things you were watching. I'm just curious kind of like what made you draw in and be like, this is sort of what his narrative is going to be. Yeah,
no, it's a great question, man. I think in a lot of ways, Javi was like an ulterior version of myself.
Yeah.
Like he was the person, you know, when I had this like, you know, shift that I was talking about my kids and everything, and like priorities changed. He was the version that I was like, what if I had went in all in on that type of stuff and like took it to its furthest extent, you know, because there were times where I started to get these opportunities where it's like writing things that, you know, would have looked great to share online, but that I would have personally felt like, I don't want to write these kinds of stories anymore. I want to write different ones, or I want to, you know, I have different aspirations and I feel kind of boxed in. But like, I should just keep playing the game. And like, eventually I'll just get where I need to be, you know?
Right.
So obviously it wasn't on the level of like all the things that Javi gets into,
but
it was that like, I could imagine going down that rabbit hole and like not coming back up for air, like I was able to do personally, and like what that would do to somebody, you know? And I think, like you said, it speaks to a lot of larger things that everyday people are struggling with now, you know. Like we're all basically like brands, you know, and you're like managing your brand, you know, and it's like, it's a full-time job sometimes, you know. And so I think it's something that was obviously on my mind and a lot of people's minds. And so it was kind of cool to like imagine, like go all in with Javi, as if I would have gone that route, like what would have happened, you know, if I would have taken it to the furthest extreme, what would that look like?
Yeah, and that's actually fascinating to me, a perspective of you, like you talking about almost imagining it as if you went down that road, right? Like what if you went all in on it? And I think it's interesting because, you know, when I was younger, I was super into fiction books. As I got older, I just got like super into personal growth books and all those types of things, business books and whatever else. And I sort of, I think, lost a bit of my love for fictional books, you know, and actually it's been a while since I've picked up one. Yours is actually one of the first in a while for me.
I'm honored, man.
No, and honestly, I would say thank you, because I was able to sort of like actually see the bigger picture. I don't know if now I'm at a different point in my life where I can understand like this is art and you're supposed to interpret it, you know, it's telling a larger story and they're just using fictional characters as like a vehicle to do that, right? But I love you sort of looking at it from that perspective of like, this is sort of your chance to explore like what would have happened had you gone down a different path in your life. And I'd imagine even writing a book of fiction, something like this, there has to be something very therapeutic about it for you.
Yeah, sure. That was, you know, it was sort of just excavating all those demons that I had back then and like trying to put them on the page, because I think I realized that, you know, just in conversation with friends and just, you know, I read a lot and monitor what's going on, and I'm like, there's a lot of people who are kind of feeling this way, and like something, you know, there's not really something to speak to it in the way that I wanted to speak to it. So
yeah, no, I love that, man. I want a couple more things on the book, because I like the way that it begins, like, you have the main character Javi going to visit his dad in Puerto Rico, right?
Yeah.
And sort of one of the initial things that his dad says to him is like, "Don't embarrass me. You have to speak Spanish while you're here," basically, right? And
Yeah.
I love that you made it a point to touch on that, and it was subtle, but it was like people like myself who have heard that their entire life, that like struck a nerve. So I'm curious, and also you even in your book acknowledge, like, you dedicate the book to all the ghetto nerds worldwide, which I love, right? So a lot of this podcast is about people embracing their otherness, right? And I think in very subtle ways you were able to do that. So I'm curious, for you, was this sort of also a personal narrative, and even just in general, you celebrating the fact that you maybe don't fit in completely, but like you're finding value within that, right? And you're acknowledging it now.
Yeah, for sure. It's, like, yeah, I grew up, my mother's Puerto Rican, and I was spent a lot of my summers in Puerto Rico and Loíza, where my family's from.
Yeah.
And they shipped me off there in the summer, and
Yeah.
but I'm like from the Bronx, so we speak English everywhere. So,
Yeah.
I got cousins and stuff, and we just really can't communicate. Like, I would just,
Yeah.
we'd play and everything, and they'd be like, "Oh, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, go."
Right.
Like, they know like 3 words in English, and I know
Right.
like 3 words in Spanish, but we play, and
Yeah.
and as I got into my young adulthood and stuff, and the teenager, and whenever I go back, I feel weird because I'm to them, I'm not really Puerto Rican sometimes.
Yep.
Like, I'm American. But then in America, like, especially when I got to college, because in the Bronx nobody cares. You Spanish, like,
Right.
we're all from the Bronx, nobody really cares.
Yeah.
But then when I went to Cornell in Ithaca, it's this very elite school. I got meeting all these types of people, and it's like people were like, "Oh, you're Mexican. Oh, you're like
Right.
you're Latino. You're like whatever, And then I would meet like rich Puerto Ricans from the island in Cornell who were like, "You're not Puerto Rican." You know what I mean? So it's like, so I was like, "What the fuck? Like, what am I?" You know what I mean?
Of course.
And it was very disorienting, and I think it became even more disorienting during the heightened time where like identity. There was a moment where like everybody's Twitter bio was like, "I'm Puerto Rican and half this and 1/4 this and 1/4." We're all like just claiming, all these places where we're from, and so I'm like, okay, I'm Puerto Rican, yeah, and I'm Latino, but like my dad is like, who's not really my life, but he's like from Poland, like he has an accent and everything, like he's not even like a citizen, like you know what I mean? So it's just like, that's part of me too. I don't know anything about, so it's like this, I was always just in this gray area. And I think it's only as I've come into like adulthood that I'm just like, I don't want to play these games, man. I'm just, I am what I am. Like, I like to say I'm human.
Right. First and foremost.
Like, that's what I just say now. Like, and I claim all the other things too, but I just like, I guess it's a weird sort of game, and I'm just kind of like trying to opt out a little bit.
Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah, well, I think it's even probably more difficult, like being mixed, right? Because then it really is like even more of an identity crisis, at that point. And I think it's also interesting how people try to tell you what you are too, right? And then that like fucks you up even more. Because you're constantly trying to prove this, right? And then it's like, that's because I'm big on like authenticity, but it's like that's the struggle, is like then somebody tries to tell you who you are, you don't agree, so then you overcompensate to be this like the proving ground that you're not what they said that you were, and then now you're not being authentic whatsoever, right? And you're getting even further and further away from yourself. And I mean, I'm curious, did you have a sort of like come to Jesus moment where you were just like, nah, this is who I am. I can own this space. I can occupy it, right? Because you talk about getting the opportunity to write stories from a perspective of a person of color, right? So I'm sure there had to be a point where you got comfortable and said, yeah, I can own this. Yeah, I can do this. My voice is needed in this space.
Yeah, it was a long process, but like I wrote a story for the New Yorker about Hurricane Maria. I went to Puerto Rico with my family to Loíza, and we like were helping people out, and so I was like doing on the ground reporting in Puerto Rico for like this, for the New Yorkers. It's, they're not writing about Puerto Rico unless I'm doing it. So I'm like, so it was like a very it was something that I grappled with a lot, because like, am I the right person to be doing this? Like, my Spanish isn't that great. Like I can speak a little bit, but like, am I a fraud? Like I had to do a lot of like inner soul searching for that. And I don't know, I guess at some point I just kind of accepted like, this is me, and this is like lean into my voice, which I think is so multi hyphenated and all these different perspectives that I realized eventually that like there is value to that. Like I'm not the like super authentic voice or whatever the imagination of that is,
Sure.
but I'm this, and this is fine too. Like this is part of who we are. We're such a, especially as Latinos, we're so broad, man. Like I live in Miami, and it's like we're like with all colors, like all like everything, man. All types. We mix so much. It's like my wife is Colombian. She has family members who are like Colombian Chinese. We got like Puerto Rican and Polish. I've met like 3 Puerto Rican and Polish people while I've been here. Like there's just we're all out there. So it's just like to pretend that we're like in these little like confined spaces. I realized eventually like it's just kind of silly.
Yeah, and I think it's important to have those diverse voices to represent that, right? Because to your point, there's a lot of us out here who are identify as various different things or have different experiences, and to think that only one perspective would be represented, that leaves out a whole lot of other people to not hear or see themselves in those who are getting, lucky enough to have some sort of platform. And it's funny you mentioned Maria. That was sort of a big turning point for me, where at the time I was working for the radio show The Breakfast Club, and I didn't feel like it was getting the coverage that it deserved, and I was frustrated. I was like, didn't know what to do. And to your point, I remember feeling like, I don't know if I'm the guy to do this, but like, it was just like, I felt passionate about it, and I had to step in and be that person. And I think it was just subconscious. I think subconsciously you were that person. I was that person, right? But the outside world had told us for so long that we don't have a place there, right? That made us sort of doubt that. And I think that's probably the beauty in finding your voice, is like finding the strength in the fact that you don't have to check off all of these conceived notions of what it means to be Latino, to be Puerto Rican, to have a place there and to speak on behalf of your experience and what you're passionate about. And I think that definitely, like Hurricane Maria was definitely that moment for me as well.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that, man. It was, I guess it was like the most recent moment. There's moments where Puerto Rico like all of a sudden bubbles up and they remember that we're there.
Right. Right.
We're like, oh yeah, we kind of own them, and what's going on over there?
Right.
And so it's like these moments like happen every now and then, usually around tragedy and hurricanes. And so it's interesting to hear your experience of like having your own sort of self-actualization at that moment too.
Yeah. I mean, it's wild how, I don't know, man, just certain things like stick with you, but like it's we're all obviously, better for it. I think it for me was a breakthrough that I had been looking for. And I think I'm curious now, like, to kind of backtrack just a little bit into your own story. I mean, you're a kid from the Bronx. My mom was a teacher and then eventually a principal in the South Bronx. So I'm very familiar with the area. I went to school there when I was younger. And not many people are able to be inspired to think they could have life outside of that, right? The kids that go to school there are really dealing with dire circumstances that, unless you're there, you don't really understand what it's like. A lot of broken homes, a lot of parents who aren't there, who literally are using school as a free daycare, essentially, right? Like, the biggest thing I noticed when I came to Jersey was they didn't have free summer school. Like, summer school in Jersey was if you failed a class. Summer school in the Bronx was literally free daycare for those who couldn't afford it. They had to drop their kids off because they had to go to work, right? And that's like amongst the least of the those kids' troubles. And I think there is, to the point, the conversation of diversity and diversity practices, kids like that do need a little bit extra, because they have so much stacked against them, and they don't have any real sort of mentorship as far as their ability to get out of that circumstance. And I think somebody like you is a great sort of inspiration to that, right? Because you're walking a path that is unique for just anybody in general, right? Like, to be a actual published author, for this to be your job, is a very small percentage of human beings, right? But to be a kid from the Bronx, to go to Cornell, if I'm not mistaken, is what you said, right?
Yeah.
In elite Ivy League school, and then to go on this trajectory of being able to make your passion your job, it's wild. So I'm curious, like, growing up, man, like, for you, what was, I don't know, the inspiration behind it, your family life, were they supportive, kind of the whole gamut of what you attest to being able to even walk this path?
Yeah, man. No, it's a great question, and I appreciate it. Yeah, I don't know, man. It's in a lot of ways it feels like a crazy journey.
Yeah.
Like just knowing like close friends of mine, like what I grew up around, man. Like just really, really terrible, dire situations for a lot of people. Like
Hmm.
it's really interesting that when I got to Cornell and like people learn about my own backstory and like, yeah, my dad wasn't around and we had, people in my family were, caught up in drug-related violence and stuff, Puerto Rico. And,
Hmm.
so we had a lot of shit going on for me too. But like, it wasn't until I got there and I would like just talk about it because it was normal to me that people would
Hmm.
look at me like, oh man, that's like so terrible and tragic. But like,
Right.
for me, I was like, nah, I had it good, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a single mom, but she was great. Like
Yeah.
she was like on top of me, and like she would take me to Barnes and Noble because I had an interest in writing and reading.
Mm.
So like in a lot of ways, I felt lucky, man. Like honestly, to be real with you, I just felt lucky. And
Yeah.
so it kind of messed with my head for a while because I think the first iterations of this book, and that theme is still kind of present in there in a little bit in the final version, but it was more about these two characters, Javi and his friend Gio, who gets locked up, and they take these two different paths in life. And Javi, I was writing because I was thinking about, I'm just like, I was at Cornell and I was like, how did I get here?
Hmm.
And like all the kids that I grew up, like some of them are in jail, they're like on drugs, and I'm just like, it was like a mind fuck. I didn't
Yeah.
understand, like, and I had like survivor's guilt, to be honest
Mm.
with you. I was just like, dude, am I supposed to be here? Did I just get like, like chosen by the little like hand that picks you out of the thing, and
Yeah.
like, so it was a lot to grapple with, man. But it's, I think I had a lot of support, I was lucky from my mother, my mother was an excellent single mom and like, she's not a big reader, but she was just always supportive of whatever I wanted to do. Like there was never like, oh, you got to go make money and like you shouldn't be a writer or an
Mm.
artist. It was like just like happy that I was going to do something that I loved. She worked
Mm.
jobs that she didn't love that she had to do, and she was just like thrilled that her child would be able to go pursue something that he was actually like going to be happy to do, which is like
Yeah.
a luxury. And so I don't know, like I guess having that support, like from her, from other people in my community, family, who maybe didn't necessarily I don't think they still really understand what I do.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
I think some of them, I'm writing a book and I might as well be saying I'm like writing my journal. They don't really like,
Right.
you know what I mean?
Yeah. They don't
Like it's
understand
like,
how
oh,
difficult that is.
doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily compute, but they support me, and they're like, oh, yeah, Andrew's the writer, that's
Yeah.
what's up. Like, and I had people in my community like that. And so I don't know, man. I felt like once things started happening for me, I was like, I really got nothing to lose, man. Like, people behind me support me, and I would be in places and think, am I supposed to be here? Like, that would kind of mess me up. But then after a while, as I got older, more comfortable, I'm like, no, I'm here. And
Yeah.
I see the importance of it. You know what I
Mm.
mean? I see like you said, I dedicated the book to like the ghetto nerds of the Bronx. Like, and that's real. Like, I really hope, I don't really care about sales and whatever. Like, I really hope that like three kids in the Bronx or whatever pick it up and they're like, oh, I could be a writer, or like
Hmm.
if they're interested in that, then like fuck, man, that's dope. That's all I want. Like I had people who did that for me.
Yeah.
I read like Juno Diaz in college and like Ernesto Quinones and like
Mm.
these writers who were writing kind of our stories in the 90s. And I just that reading, seeing one example was like that was really all I needed to be like, all right, I'm gonna do that too. So it's important.
Yeah, and I don't have kids, but I think the one thing I always sort of like harp on, and I think even in adult life, be it your spouse, it doesn't necessarily have to be like in a dynamic of children, but like sometimes all you need is one person believing in you
Yeah,
and telling
man.
you that's possible. Like it's really that simple sometimes. Like all people are starving for is just one cosign from somebody that like they trust, a trusted voice to say, I think you can do this and you should pursue it, right? Because I think we're inundated with so many people telling you that everything is impossible. I mean, the system is set up to make you feel like you have to go a very traditional route to ever find success, right? That's the only way to find success. And I think what's sort of lost with a lot of parents is they think because they don't understand it that means it's impossible, right? Where they're forgetting and they're not realizing, and in particular, I think in our community where there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of struggle, There's, there's just so much sort of trauma there generationally that we tend to play it safe. We play small to a degree as a community, right? And I think what a lot of people sort of don't realize is like the difference between those who are able to make a career out of their passions, they're able to do the impossible. They just have a real belief. That's the core, I think, of all the shit we're talking about is like having, it starts with just having a really strong belief. And once you believe it, it can actually happen. Then all the steps don't seem that crazy. Then you can actually put a plan in place because you genuinely believe that it's tangible. But like it starts with somebody co-signing that dream, of yours. And I think it's so beautiful to hear like your mom was that person from an early age.
Yeah, no, man, yeah, I totally agree with you. Like you need somebody in your corner. You need somebody who's like, nah, I believe in you. You're gonna do it, And like you said, they don't even necessarily have to understand it. Just support it, like blindly. Like I support you, whatever it is you want to do, like let's go, And so I just feel really fortunate that I had that, and someone from like my mom who's so close to you and like dealing with on a daily basis, like, so that just set the tone for everything else.
Yeah, and that's such a beautiful thing. I mean, I kind of want to sort of like end the conversation on talking a bit about the industry as a whole, right? Because you have a statistic, and I think I've read that it's getting better, but like it was something like 95% of American fiction books published were written by white authors between 1950 and 2018, right? And I'd imagine, I mean, you have obviously the credibility under your belt of writing for real publications that people respect, like the New Yorker, New York Times, the Atlantic. But I'm curious, like the journey for you as this being like your debut novel, of it actually getting made, right? Because to your point, a lot of people out there think you just wrote it, you send it to somebody, and next thing you know, you have a fucking book deal, right? And it's not that simple.
I wish.
right. Like this is a really like difficult industry to sort of break into. And a lot of people, again, living in their own bubble, think because I haven't heard that person's name before, it must mean that just anybody with a good idea can get a book deal, right? So I am curious for you, what was the pathway to actually getting Victim to come to life? I mean, shit, you said it was like a 10-year process, even just writing it.
Yeah, it was 10 years, man. And it was, largely just working. Like I wake up every day at 5 a.m. and I work from 5 to 7 a.m. I've done that since before I had kids. Like I just get my 2 hours in, and that's just my process. And so like
that's life changing, by the way, because I instilled that mine is from 6 to 8 a.m. And literally, when I don't do it, I know my day goes off the rails, and when I do it, I feel the best, and I'm so fucking accomplished. Like I'm in such a great mood when I do it. That's the cheat code. But sorry, go on.
It is no, exactly, man. Like when I decided that this is something I wanted to do, and I was probably like 20, 21 years old, and I was like, no, I'm gonna do this.
Yeah.
I just committed, and like, so I'm gonna wake up every morning. I'm gonna work. First, it was like little short stories, and then the short stories got a couple published and some awards, and then I was like slowly built it into a book. That book didn't work out. Like I wrote like probably 5 or 6 versions of this book, to be honest. They had the same characters, but they were just like, I was just trying to like put different permutations together and see which one worked. I tried to get agents for years and didn't get interest, or like people wanted me to tell a different story I didn't want to tell. So it was a super long journey. I mean, I think I actually hooked up with my agent that I have now, Danielle Bukowski, in 2019 or something like that. So, we started working on this version at that point. And then even from then, it was another 3 years of working with her, reading, she'd read it, give me comments. I go back, like, until we finally got it ready to get, take it out to the market in it was like the spring of 2022. And then, I had put in so much time. I just assumed it was going to take forever to sell.
Yeah.
And it didn't. It just, I guess it, it was, people liked it. It was good. It was like timely at that point. I didn't think it would be, but it became timely. And so the whole process of actually selling it was fast. That happened within a matter of a couple of weeks or so. Which is not the norm, I've heard. I didn't really know.
Yeah.
So, but I had put in like 10 years of like serious daily grinding, to finally get there. So yeah, man, it was a mission, and it was just really cool to see it like finally pay off.
Yeah, I want to kind of peel back the curtain a little bit, like, because I think
Yeah.
if anybody is a writer out there, I know I just there's certain listeners that I'm thinking of in mind, that writing is one of those fields where it just seems like you're always kind of on this uphill battle because there's no clear path. There's no like, right, you either become a celebrity, then you get a book deal, or you do the, you know what I'm saying? It's like there's so many different avenues and there's no real clear way, and you can't just like mail your, this idea of a book to somebody and then they read them and respond accordingly. It's a very like weird, industry to be able to break into. I'm curious, how you got your agent who sort of was able to have the connections needed, but then also
Mhm.
is it normal that your agent would have that belief in you, that they would be that patient for years to sit by you to kind of help you fine tune the book along the way?
Yeah, so Danielle, I found her because she had represented other writers that I respected, and I knew that she was younger.
Hmm.
I had my dealings with like older, more like established agents, and just saw how they treated me, and it was just clear to me that like I'm just gonna be one of their roster, like number 100 on their roster. Like,
Right.
they would just wait for me to finish, and then if never really care about what I was doing.
Yeah.
Whereas Danielle, like I think she liked some of my nonfiction already, and so we kind of had a rapport, and I really respected the people that she represented. And I liked the fact after talking to her that she was my age, that we're in the same page. We're
Hmm.
both hungry, just trying to like break in. She was like just building her list. Now she's like got a great list of writers, and it's cool that I was like one of the first ones, and
Hmm.
like now I've seen her grow, and it's been awesome to see. And so, but I feel like we've been like sort of growing together. And so I think that I don't know if an agent would have been as hands-on as she has been with me, and really giving me feedback and like hearing me out. And but that was something that I sought out.
Mm.
I had the option to go with like the big name that's gonna like make a headline because you signed with them. But
Yeah.
in those conversations, I kind of like, like I'm from the Bronx. Like I could just understand. Like I could like
Yeah.
I'm really trained in like sussing people out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
and so I was just like, you don't really fuck with me. Like
Yeah.
you just
Yeah.
like you just kind of fuck with me. And so like
Right.
and Danielle was like, oh, you really like you believe in me,
Yeah.
and so I made the decision that I was like, no, like I want to go with someone like that, even if she didn't have a big name or whatever at that point.
Mm.
And in hindsight, I think it was a great move, because I think and I counsel people who come to me for advice about this stuff, like, oh, I'm trying to get an agent now, I'm trying to get a book deal, and I'm always like, the same thing I tell them is like, trust your gut, and like go with people who like really get what you're doing, and want to further it along, and not necessarily go with the big names or whatever, because in the long run, it might not be most beneficial to you. And so that's my biggest piece of advice is like, when you're at that stage, don't try to get an agent,
Yeah.
before you actually get a book that it's like that you're ready to get out there and you're proud of and you put in the work.
Right.
When you are, find people who are gonna really believe in it, who do believe in it, and who wanna like who have the same vision as you do.
Yeah, I love that. It's kind of like a variation of the quote of go where you're celebrated, not tolerated, right? I think
Yeah, exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
a person who genuinely believes in what you're doing is oftentimes more valuable than anything else, than any sort of big name or any sort of cachet. I mean, all right, so I love the idea of like get up early every day and set aside those couple hours to just hone your craft, right? And to do your thing and to work on your passion. What would be like the next first step you would say to somebody who wants to be a writer? I mean, obviously you were submitting to a lot of different publications early on. What was that
Yeah.
process sort of like for you at the beginning? And we can kind of end on there because I think that that's also incredibly valuable.
Yeah, so I mean, I had these dual interests always. Journalism was actually I started writing journalism when I was like 16.
Mm.
I had wrote for a local paper in the Bronx, and it was mostly because I saw like when I realized like I'm good at writing, and I love to read, and this is something I could pursue. I didn't really even know that like you could be a writer, like a fiction writer. That wasn't like a job that I even understood was possible or like out
Yeah.
there. But I knew that they were journalists, and like I would read the New York Post and see like the sports writers and the Daily News, and I was like, oh, okay, I could do that. And so like I started doing journalism first, and so I think for a long time I've kind of had both those careers in tandem. And I know for some audience, they might think like, what's the difference? But they're quite different. You know, like when you're pursuing a journalism path, you're writing different types of stories, you're trying to build different types of skills, whereas like the creative fiction path is like a slower, more intensive, like inner kind of project that takes a lot different. Like the timing is very different.
Sure.
You could become a star reporter, if you get the right stories and you break news and all that, but it takes a lot longer to do that for writing. So yeah, like I guess I was just pursuing the two of those at the same time, and pitching wherever I could, and just trying to like get in the door, man. Like I just have, I do like Javi, I do have like a hustler's mentality. I do have family who were, in that life. And so I in a sense, I did adopt that. Like, I'm like, all right, like this is what I want to do. So I'm going to just grind and like knock on doors, pitch as many places. If they say yes, I'm going to make sure that like I deliver what they ask for. I do it on time, that that like they're going to be impressed with me and want to keep working with me. And so I just, I focused on that, and I've applied that to all of my writing life. I think, it's weird to me when like you hear of like prima donna, like especially writers. I'm like,
you're right.
Bro. You know what I mean? Like you're not like like on the silver screen,
right.
Like, we're writers. Like no one's gonna know me on the street. Like, no one will know you. You know what I mean? So it's like when I see people who are like that, I'm like, I don't get it. So like I'm just, I try to be humble and just be like, work hard and just hope I'm putting good energy out there and good work, and people are gonna, eventually fuck with it, and so that's it, man. That's really been the whole plan.
yeah. Well, I love that, like that candidness, because I think people overcomplicate it a lot of times, where it's like they think they have to have every single facet of the journey figured out before they actually go out on it. And it's like, nah, like, listen, it's going to be trial and error. There's no clear path. A lot of it literally is just you being a nerd and researching the hell out of everything that you're actually interested in, right? Like whatever, to your point of like even finding your agent, these authors that you liked, you looked up who they were represented by, then you looked into her, you know what I'm saying? So it's literally just like following the breadcrumbs, reaching out, seeing who responds, following that up, like just literally continuing to just research, grind. Eventually you're going to stumble into something. And I think that's sort of the methodology people have to learn, is like, it's not as complicated as we tend to make it. We keep like thinking we have to have it all figured out. And I think it's
nah, man, it's one step. It's one step at a time,
Exactly. That's really well said, man. So listen, brother, I appreciate you, dude. I love the conversation and all the work that you're doing. The book is amazing. Victim is available March 12th. You can pre-order it right now, though, wherever you find books. Where can people follow you on socials and all that to keep up what you're working on?
Yeah, man. At Bory Writes. You can follow me Twitter, Instagram. I think those are the main two I have.
Cool. Well,
thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, man. This has been really cool.
Of course, bro. Anytime, man. Listen, next time you pump out another one of these books, you let me know. We'll have you back on the show. I'd love to talk about it.
Yeah, and I hope you stock up on your fiction in between.
I know. Listen,
you got re-inspired.
you got for real. You got me inspired. I see the value in it again. So I'm gonna definitely look up some books. I might hit you up for a recommended reading list.
Hit me up for recommendations. I got you.
I appreciate you, bro. Man, big shout to my guest this week, Andrew Boryga, for hopping on the show. Victim out March 12th. You can pre-order it right now. And like I said, they will deliver it directly to your house. I just like meeting good people who are living their dream, living their passion, beating out the odds, and it's just amazing. So really, really cool book, and also just great at what they do. I really enjoyed this book. I wasn't bullshitting. Genuinely was like, oh man, I think I need to start getting back into fiction books. I really meant that. So just really, really good book, really cool guy, and got to support, of course, any which way we can. People who are talented from the community doing amazing things. And like I mentioned, that startling statistic about the lack of representation when it comes to writers of color, specifically for like fictional books, is crazy. So love to be able to help out and meet people like this. It's really inspiring, honestly, making me rethink some of my writing a little bit. With that said, man, like I mentioned before, no Ask A Gringo on today's show. So let's just tie everything we talked about today in a neat little bow in a segment we call Conclusion Stew.
time for conclusion soon.
Man, I am struggling right now with my voice. I'm not gonna lie to you. I think it is just about gone. I apologize if I sound terrible. My ears haven't popped. You know, like, first of all, though, I also want to just say, it has nothing to do with the topic at hand of what we were talking about in the conversation with Andrew. We'll get to that in a second. Like, do you know the gratitude that you feel after you begin your ass whooped by a sickness for an entire week and you wake up feeling good that one day? It literally just feels like you are. Life just feels a little bit brighter. Also, the sun was shining. This is why also I went out on Sunday, because the sun was shining. I felt alive for the first time in like 5-6 days, and it was just like I was seeing the world through brand new eyes. I wish I wake up every day and just feel like I gotta trick myself into recapturing that every day, because every day is a blessing, obviously. Now back to the conversation we're talking about here with Andrew. I love how this made me sort of rethink all that I believe in to a degree when it comes to like diversity practices and all this stuff. I love how it points out, you know, a conversation that I think if you are in favor of like progress and you are in favor of, you know, whatever wokeism and being progressive, whatever the term is that people hate or, you know, whatever identify as, we also have to be very realistic about the fact that there at times is overcorrections that happen. There are times where people take advantage of these measures that are put in place. You know, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't exist. Doesn't mean that diversity practices are bad or something like that. I think it's important just even to have the dialogue, right? Have a conversation, have those tough conversations. And it's also, you know, I think important to call people out who abuse these situations. You know, there's a few that come to mind. There was the Me Too movement, and when that whole thing happened with Aziz Ansari, where it was really like a bad date, but this woman used the Me Too movement as a means to like kind of blackmail Aziz Ansari into being shamed, because I guess she had a bad date experience with him. And there wasn't, you know, he wasn't like, from the details of the story, it wasn't like he sexually assaulted her or anything like that. But she sort of used this moment as a means to, I don't know if it was to garner attention for herself or to just sort of, tarnish his name because she was mad at him because, you know, they didn't end up dating in the way that she had hoped or whatever it might be. And yeah, I think it's important to sort of call out the overcorrections, call out the BS, because those things are the ones that people can then point to and say, oh, this is why we shouldn't have these movements, because people take advantage of the system and all these different things, right? And I also think it's interesting for Andrew as somebody who has benefited, like he said, from, you know, being a person of color and the sort of spotlight and the sort of new attention that a lot of these companies or brands or publications are trying to put on diverse stories. He has benefited from that, right? And I think it's just interesting to sort of like really zoom out and question everything. And I hope I'm like explaining why I find this to be so fascinating, because I in all honesty, ironically, I think, and I mentioned this to him in the conversation, but as I'm reading it, I'm like, man, am I going to get into a conversation with somebody who is like a Trumper or something like that, who like really is on the complete opposite side of the political and social spectrum from myself? And, you know, I wasn't sure what I was getting into in the conversation. You know, him and I have never met before, getting to sit down here and talk via Zoom. But I was like, you know, I'm going to go into an open mind and let me just hear this person's perspective. And obviously that's not where he lies, you know, politically or affiliates himself. But I love the fact that he challenged himself to sort of think from that perspective or to just ask these questions, you know, especially as somebody, like I said, who has benefited from it. I think it's important to obviously have our own opinions on things, and it's important to stand strong in your opinion. But I do think it's just as important to question why you believe that the things that you do, why you support the things that you do, and also to just be inquisitive about why others might feel the opposite. You know, it doesn't mean that you have to change your point of view per se, but I think it's important to just try and get as much of the full context of the entire story or belief system as you can, so at least you have a working understanding of it, and you're not just allowing your own biases to sort of write things off or write people off. I feel like I'm going off on a tangent here, but I hope that makes sense. I try to pull this all together. I'm still a little bit delulu over here, okay? Is that what the kids are saying? Delulu, right? Also, that word just sounds weird because my ears haven't popped, so I'm not even sure if I'm enunciating things properly right now. Yeah, I need to take a nap. I think that's my solution. My answer to everything is you just need a nap. So with that said, thank y'all so much for tuning in. I apologize if I sound crazy right now. Hopefully for Thursday trends on Thursday, obviously, I will sound a lot better. Wish me luck. Pray for me. I'm going to take care of myself for the next few days. With that said, y'all be safe in the meantime. I will catch you on Thursday for a Thursday Trends episode. Until then, be safe. As I once said, I'm being redundant now. I need to cut this mic off. We need to cut it. Be safe out there, and I'll talk to you soon. Peace.